Um, okay, I wanted to start with a story. This is a very famous story. I may have told it before, but it's always powerful. There is a great philanthropist. His name is Mr. George Rohr. He is, I mean, you can Google him. He's just an incredible person. He supports some amazing, amazing organizations, gives so much tzedakah, and really believes in what he does. He's actually one of the big supporters of Chabad on campus and really just a bunch of amazing initiatives. He tells a story that many years ago, when he was first getting started, and he was, really trying to get actively involved in the Jewish community, he was living in Manhattan at the time, and he decided that he was going to pull together services for the high holidays for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in Manhattan, specifically for Jews that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be going to synagogue for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And he did it very successfully. And afterwards, he went to meet with the Lubavitch Rebbe, and he wanted to tell the Rebbe what he did. Like he said, Rebbe, I was inspired by your vision. I was inspired by what you always teach. And we managed to arrange high holiday services for approximately 100 Jewish people who have absolutely no Jewish background. Now he says, like, I was expecting to get, I was expecting the Rebbe would be so happy with me, maybe he'd give me like a high five and a compliment, like, great job, look at what you did. And he said the Rebbe's face turned very serious, and the Rebbe said to him, Jews with no Jewish background? And first he thought the Rebbe didn't understand. He says, yes, Rebbe, these are Jews that have no Jewish background, and they all came to high holiday services. And the Rebbe says, Jews with no Jewish background? Tell them. Tell them that they are children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. There's no Jew with no Jewish background. Every Jew has a Jewish soul and is 100% Jewish. And he said that, taught him a very significant lesson that he never forgot. And this is an idea that I know we've mentioned numerous times here, but it's really a very revolutionary idea that is introduced by the Tanya, specifically in this chapter, in chapter 18, where the Tanya tells us that there is something spiritually unique about the Jewish soul, that it doesn't matter who you are, what you don't do, how Jewishly evolved you are or aren't, your spiritual DNA will remain uniquely Jewish. And that means that every Jew has an inherited Jewish background. There's no such thing as a Jew that's not, that's not Jewish enough, that doesn't have that shared Jewishness. We were talking last time about, hi, Lorraine.
Hey, hi
See,
everybody.
we were
Oops.
we were talking last time about how, other people try to look at Jews and try to figure out, like, what is it that makes these Jews so different, so unique? And you hear a lot of theories. Maybe Jews are just, really smart, and that's why they're always so, successful or whatever. Or I've heard theories of, they've been through so much persecution, and this is what a lot of persecution does to people. Or Jews always care about education, and because Jews always care about education, they end up being, very successful. Now, all of these could be true. The Tanya gives us an additional angle, and the Tanya tells us there's also a spiritual element that makes us unique, and that is that our souls have a unique spiritual Jewish trademark, regardless of our IQ, regardless of what kind of home we were raised in or what kind of values our parents did or didn't have. There is going to be something that's going to make a Jew Jewish. Now, why are we talking about this in this chapter? Just to recap a little bit, the Tanya is trying to encourage us to achieve the level of Benoni, even if not a permanent level of Benoni, but at least in windows of time, we're trying to attain this level where I can be faced with, desires that are not correct or not ideal, and I could still do the right thing in the face of temptation, in the face of challenge. That's what a Benoni does. A Benoni, even when faced with challenge, even when the Benoni wants to do a million different things, always makes the right choice and finds the power to make the right choice. So we were discussing the different types of Benoni. First, at some point, we introduced the boring Benoni. Somebody who they succeed at being a Benoni because just naturally they're just that kind of person. They like to read a lot. They don't have many temptations. They don't like to go out. They don't have any great desires in life. And so it's easy. They're just like a natural bookworm Benoni. Um, and we spent one chapter talking about that just to establish that that's not the Benoni we're aspiring to be, and somebody who, hi Trisha, and somebody who's at that level, somebody who has that life experience, they actually need to push themselves to a place where they aren't so comfortable and push themselves beyond their comfort zone. Then we spent time talking about a Benoni who uses their intellect. They spend a lot of time meditating, studying, contemplating, really comprehending these ideas about God and godliness, and that affects their emotion, which affects how they behave. Now in chapter 18, the Tanya says, okay, let's be real. Not everybody has the IQ or the intellectual ability to comprehend lofty godly thoughts. Not everybody has the knowledge required to study so much about God. Like you need to know in order to study. There has to be a way that every single Jew could attain the level of Benoni now, like today. Not only when I study enough that I have enough to meditate about, and not only if I have this type of, boring personality. There needs to be a way that every Jew, no matter what, could tap into this level of Benoni. Otherwise, how could God expect it of us? And so in this chapter and going on for the next few chapters, the Tanya talks about the Jewish soul. That yes, actually, we could tap into our soul to help us achieve the level of Benoni, because there is something that's unique about the Jewish soul. That's how we got into this whole discussion. Kind of like, yes, we still want to study and meditate and contemplate to create these emotions and get into this relationship with God. At the same time, there's a like, in case of emergency, break glass, like regardless, there's always something that we can tap into. What is this thing that we can tap into? That is what we call the hidden love that resides inside the Jewish soul. That's kind of what we spoke about last time. We didn't really discuss what is this love. We just explained that this love exists, and we didn't explain much what it is, how we tap into it, or how we ever got it. Like, how does it happen that by being born Jewish, I have this inside of me? And that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to pull up the text of chapter 18, and let's see if we can read some of it inside. Sorry, I highlighted the ones that I wanted us to read. No, it wasn't here. Here we go. Okay. But we must first preface a clear and precise explanation of the origin of this love. Like, where does this love come from? And what is its character? Also, how did this love become our inheritance? How does someone inherit love? And how is fear also incorporated in it? When the Tanya says fear, remember the Tanya is talking more about like the emotions of awe, meaning the relationship we have with God is not only love. There's a love, there's an awe, there's passion, like there's a lot of colors within the emotional relationship. And the two base ones are what the Tanya calls love and fear, or love and awe. So if we say that inherently I have like the capacity for a real emotional connection with God, it has to be not just love. It has to be, a full range of emotions that I could access. The explanation is as follows. The patriarchs, meaning Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, were truly the chariot of God. So this is interesting that when we learn about the patriarchs, sometimes they go, oh, they were nice, great people. The Tanya tells us that our patriarchs and our matriarchs were not just great people who were the founders of our nation, but they had something really special about them that the Tanya calls Merkava, a chariot. If you think for a minute about modern day chariot, which would be a car, right? When the car driver is driving, the rest of the car moves along. Wherever the driver navigates to, that's where the car goes to. What happens if I'm driving and I turn right, but my car starts going left? Well, I better run to a mechanic because that's not going to end very well, right? Ideally, a car doesn't have a will or a desire of its own. It will do whatever the driver does with it. Wherever the driver goes, that's where the car goes. Kabbalah explains that this is the relationship that our patriarchs and our matriarchs had with God. Meaning, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they didn't have desires of their own. They reached a level where they were so connected to and subjugated to God that they would do whatever God's desire was, that was their desire. So it's actually interesting if you are familiar with the story of the binding of Isaac. So in the text, God told Abraham, bring up your son as a sacrifice. So Abraham did just that. And it says at the end, the text says, Vayishlach et yado. He sent his hand. That Abraham sent his hand that was holding the knife. What do you mean he sent his hand? You take your hand and you do whatever you need to do with your hand. What does it mean he sent his hand? And that's where the commentaries explain that he was literally like a chariot. There was nothing that said, oh, God said this. Oh, I think I'm going to listen. I think I'm not going to listen. There was no I. Like sending his hand was basically a messenger that wasn't part of him. He identified fully with God. And he had to send his hand to do whatever it is that God had told him to do. And there are many, many stories that we actually could pull apart each of the stories that the Torah tells us about these great people to really see how they lived their life in this way of being a chariot. So the Tanya tells us that because they lived their lives in this way, they merited a special gift. God said, because you lived your life with such humility and the word the Tanya uses is bitul. Bitul means self-nullification. Like, I don't exist. It's only you. Therefore, they got a gift. And the gift is that they will have the ability to pass down an element of this trait to their children. An element, what are they going to exactly are they passing down to their children? They are passing down to their children that ability to be really attuned to and connected to the higher power. Almost like a spiritual sensitivity. Now, of course, their kids could choose what they want to do with it. But God says, I'm going to allow you to give this over to each of your children as an inheritance. We know that we have our physical DNA, that we get different traits from our parents. This is not a DNA that passes in the blood. This is a DNA that passes in the soul. So somebody who converts to Judaism and gets a Jewish soul has the same DNA. This is a soul that is spiritually connected to all the souls of the Jewish people. Yes, Lorraine.
Okay, so you just raised so many questions, and this is the first time I've ever heard it said the way you just said it and translated the way you just translated. Because as a parent, I have always thought there is nothing that could happen that would make me raise a knife to get ready to kill one of my boys. If I heard a voice, I would say, oh my God, I'm losing it. Like there's nothing. And so the fact that you just said it that way, that he really didn't have the choice, he really believed he was like an instrument of God and he would just do what. So that though negates what you were saying before about, the person that just studies all the time and he doesn't really have anything else going on in life. It's not as big an effort as someone who's like a crazed human and like takes time out to really study and really, as opposed to someone who's like in the yeshiva and that's what they do. They study 24/7. And, you once said the thing about where you are in the rung on the ladder. And like, I'm pretty far down the ladder, but every tiny little step is like a huge freaking deal for me. Whereas like the yeshiva guys, it's their life. So this is making me think, if they were just a chariot, if there was no like free will, like me, like, oh my God, there's no way I could harm my own child. How is that? They're like a puppet. They're not.
I know, I
Okay,
hear what
so I'm
you're
going to
saying.
be quiet. I'm going to be
No, I
quiet
think
for a second.
I think you're putting together two different ideas. You're putting together that you're assuming that because they were a chariot to God, they therefore didn't have a will. They put aside their own will to become God's chariot willingly. It's not that they were forced to. Abraham made the choice and he said, God, whatever you say is what I do. I will not be thinking for myself. I'm literally going to be a chariot following the driver. So that was a choice that he made. That's a choice that most people, I mean, I think even if we want to, we're not on that level to be able to make that choice. We can incorporate that into elements of our lives and we could say, I'm going to try to do whatever God says, but there's still a part of it that's me. I still think and I still have, desires. And then I say, no, I'm not going to listen to that voice. I'm going to listen to the voice that tells me, to do what God wants me to do. The We're talking about people that were at the level of a tzaddik, so meaning they've managed to fully conquer their inside and eliminate that other voice that tells them to do otherwise and make themselves into these complete chariots for God.
So like when you said the thing about how Abraham, was like, God, your will, not mine. I say that 24 times a day. I am I am constantly saying, dear God, take this thought from my heart and my head. Dear God, please erase this. Dear God, don't let me think that. Like I am, it's like nonstop. So, I
So maybe
mean,
you're at that level,
I'm at what level?
at the level of fully being able to
Of
fully put
begging
aside
God
your.
to come and enter my life. That's my level. I
We're
don't
talking
know.
about no, we're talking about a place where, and again, this is not, the Tanya is not trying to tell us that this is attainable for most people that we're trying to get there. The Tanya is just describing to us these unique individuals, and that's why they were chosen to be the mothers and the fathers of the Jewish nation. They weren't everyday people. These are people who are able to completely put their own human desires aside and completely and totally be connected to God in a way that whatever God says is what they do. They didn't even have to think. Not because God turned them into puppets, but if we're going to use the puppet analogy, they made themselves into puppets to God. Like they chose to become an extension of God, which is something very unique. And God said, I'm going to reward you for it. You get a gift. Your gift is now that you get to transmit an element of this to all of your spiritual descendants. And that means that when a child is born to a Jewish mother, or when somebody joins the Jewish nation, according to the Torah prescribed way of joining the Jewish nation, they are gifted a soul that has a unique Jewish stamp on it. And the unique Jewish branding includes a certain spiritual sensitivity. What is a spiritual sensitivity? What does it look like? What does it mean, right? We all know a lot of Jewish people who don't seem to be living a very spiritually sensitive life. And Jews come in all shapes and colors, right? So what does it mean that the Jews have this? So think about it as a, okay, so if we're going to say spiritual sensitivity, the idea of being a Merkava, a chariot, is having an awareness that there is something higher, that there is something that I'm trying to connect to that's higher than me. The spiritual sensitivity that the Jewish soul has is just like that. It's like having had an experience where I experience something higher. I may not be able to verbalize what it is. I may not even be able to cognitively think of what it is, but there is something inside me that just drives me to connect to that something higher. Now, it's interesting because you'll see a lot of Jewish people completely, regardless of religion, end up being very, very driven, right? You have Jews who are like at the forefront of every ism, of every big movement, right? It was communism, socialism, I mean, the hippie movement of the 60s, whatever movement there's always Jews leading it. Like you can know for sure that there are Jews leading it. Why? It's just amazing. Jews have this drive. It's a drive to connect to something that's higher. Now, if I don't, what is it? It's a drive coming from the soul. And truthfully, my soul really wants to connect to God. So long as my soul is not connecting to God, it's going to keep searching. It's going to keep driving. And what that looks like on the outside is just a very driven people that no matter their circumstances, no matter what's going on, they're always at the top in academics, at the top of scientific successes, at the top of social movements, just always striving, always yearning for something more. Another way that you'll see it expressed is that when I think it's almost like that spark in a Flintstone, like it may not be alive, but when it gets ignited, suddenly it really flares up. So the Tanya tells us that another time that you see this, spiritual sensitivity is when a Jew feels that their Jewishness is threatened. And I know we've mentioned this many times in this class before, and for different people, that's going to look different because everyone has a different idea of what it means that my Jewishness is threatened, right? The most simple, horrific example that unfortunately we've experienced throughout history is where Jews are told, convert or die. And how many Jews choose to die rather than convert? Jews who are not, and what makes it uniquely Jewish? You have other groups of people who have been told, change your ways or die. In other groups, it's the very committed people who will give up their life for their beliefs. Let's say somebody really, really believes in, I'm just going to say saving the dolphins, right? And they are threatened with, well, going to have to kill a certain amount of dolphins or it's your life. Which one? I would understand if somebody who is so committed to it would say, you know what? I'd rather give up my life and save 1,000 dolphins. What I wouldn't expect, though, is that their next door neighbor, who couldn't care less about the dolphins, that they would also agree to give up their life for the dolphins. That wouldn't make sense. They don't care about dolphins. With Jews, you see uniquely that Jews who have not lived their life in accordance with Judaism, have not sometimes even were very outspoken against Judaism, but even if not, even someone who wasn't so Jewishly connected, when they are faced with this challenge, almost always, obviously there are exceptions, but almost always, they would rather give up their life than give up their Judaism. Sometimes it's not in such a clear way, it's in a different way, right? If you go over to somebody, we could all think of that someone in our lives who maybe doesn't keep the Jewish holidays, maybe doesn't keep Shabbat, maybe doesn't keep kosher, maybe in many ways is assimilated. But if you were to come to them and say, well, you don't keep this, you don't keep that, you don't send your kids to Jewish school, you never did a bar mitzvah, you never did this, I guess then you're not really Jewish. What would they say? Can you imagine the reaction? How dare you say that? Of course I'm Jewish. Logically, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they? It's someone who legit doesn't seem to care about being Jewish. Why do they care so much when someone tells them, well, I guess you're not Jewish? I would think that they'd say, yeah, I guess not too much. But so many times they'll go up in arms about it because you just touched that Jewish spark inside them. That spark that gets ignited when it feels like my Jewishness is threatened. So whether someone's saying I'm not Jewish or someone is, threatening to, make me convert or whatever it is, we have a similar example where you have parents who, I've heard this from many college students. My parents said, do whatever makes you happy. I don't care. I'm not going to get involved in your life. I only have one rule. You have to marry Jewish. And, they grow up, they don't think much of it. And then, of course, they're in college and they meet someone special and the person's not Jewish. And then and the parents said, no, I told you that's the one thing that you have to do. And they're like, I don't understand my mom. She makes no sense. She never sent us to Hebrew school. We never did anything Jewish in our life. I mean, my parents eat, fill in the blank, whatever they eat. Why do they care if I marry someone not Jewish? I mean, this is someone who I love. What do they care? Because to the parent, that was the red line that like threatens my Judaism. I am Jewish as long as my kids marry Jewish. So whatever it is that is the line that's in the person's head that threatens their Jewishness, as soon as they feel that threat, suddenly this spark comes alive. Where does this spark come from? This is a spark that we inherit from the matriarchs and the patriarchs. It's a spark that's it's it's part of being Jewish. Now, again, why is the Tanya talking about this? Because the Tanya wants to tell us how powerful this spark is. And eventually we want to get to a discussion. Well, all right, if this spark can help me when I'm under duress or when I feel that my Jewishness is threatened, maybe there's got to be a way to access this spark on a regular Tuesday afternoon when I feel like doing X and I know I should be doing Y. How do I tap into that really passionate part of me that will enable me to live more Jewishly? That's where it comes into this discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Yes, go ahead. Was that Arlene? You want to say
Yeah.
something?
Um, I just was wondering when you talk about the inheritance of the Jewish soul, but then you talk about the transformation of the soul upon conversion. And how does that work? Is it a transformation, or is the Jewish spark added to the existing soul? That's a little hard for me um,
So
to
a person is
comprehend.
gifted, a person is specifically gifted with a Jewish soul upon conversion. Now, where do these souls come from? It's actually a very interesting teaching. Um, there's a spiritual teaching that explains that whenever a married couple has intimate relations, they are creating souls. Sometimes they're embodied, many times they're not. But every time a couple is together, they are creating a spiritual entity, a soul. Abraham and Sarah were married for many, many, many years before they had a child. Kabbalah teaches us that there were many souls created by Abraham and Sarah that were not embodied. And these are the souls that God saved for the converts. When a Jewish convert is, when they are called up to the Torah, when we pray for them, we use their name, their newly given Hebrew name, and we say Ben Avraham, or Ben or Bat Avraham, Ben or Bat Sarah. We say that Abraham and Sarah are the parents, not just because, oh, it's so nice they joined the Jewish nation, but they actually have received a soul that was given to them straight from Abraham and Sarah. So according to Jewish teachings, upon the completion of a conversion process, when the convert emerges from the mikveh and is declared 100% Jewish, they are then gifted this additional soul that I guess overtakes whatever soul it is that they had previously. So yeah, there's actually a spiritual difference within the person 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after. But it's interesting because that soul, I know we've mentioned this briefly in the past. We're told that the godly soul that we receive, we actually receive in stages. So upon birth, a child, there's a certain sensitivity and intuition that's needed in order to hold on to the godly soul. Because the godly soul, we said, it resides in the mind for the most part. That's the part of us that really holds onto the godly soul. So when a baby is born, they receive a godly soul, but their godly soul is not fully incorporated within them. Kabbalah teaches us that part of their godly soul is within them, and part of it kind of hovers around them. When the child receives a Jewish name, their soul becomes more incorporated, but their soul is not fully incorporated within them until they reach the age of bar or bat mitzvah. When I talk to pre-bar bat mitzvah kids, I love to tell them what's going to be different the day that you wake up in the morning and you are 12 or 13 on the Jewish calendar. You will have the full power of your godly soul for the very first time in your life. So, we're not used to talking about souls as like a very real reality. It's always this, not something very tangible. But when you study Kabbalah, for sure, when you study Tanya, the Tanya talks about soul all the time. And you get to a place where you start really being in tune to it and feeling it. I'll tell you another story that comes to mind. I have to change up the details to protect this person's privacy, but there is a college student who we know who has had a really, really, really difficult life. We're talking about when this person came to college, at age 18, they had already lost 3 immediate family members, and was pretty much alone in the world. Like, no parents to speak of, no relatives, really a very sad situation. Anyway, we kept inviting her over, and she would come once in a while, and every once in a while she made sure to tell us, I just want you to know, I don't plan to get too involved. Like, I'm not doing the Jewish thing. I'm just coming because I kind of want to like touch base once in a while. I know it would have made my mother happy, but I'm not getting too involved. I don't want to go too deep in. We're like, sure, like no pressure, come whenever you want. And we kept inviting, and she kept coming. This year on before Yom Kippur, so we're like, hey, you're gonna come for Yom Kippur? She's like, no, I don't do Yom Kippur. I'm not doing Yom Kippur. Like, okay, if you want to do, we're gonna have like a pre-fast meal. You're welcome to come, or okay, I'll come for the pre-fast meal, like just for a little bit. Came for the pre-fast meal, stayed for services, and at the end of services said, I just want you to know I already made plans for tomorrow. Like, I'm not coming tomorrow. Like, okay, just letting you know, you could come. Services start at this and this time. Long story short, showed up the next day for services in the morning, said, but I'm leaving. By 2 p.m., I'm leaving. Fell asleep on our couch during that break between services, stayed until the very end of Yom Kippur, stayed for every last part of Yom Kippur, and then let us know that actually she was fasting for the first time in her life. And like broke the fast and was like, I just did a full Yom Kippur for the first time in my life. And then she says, I don't even know why I did this. Like, I totally wasn't planning to. And I'm thinking, I know why you did this. It's your Jewish soul. She's like, something was just like, I just felt something like pushing me to come. Like, I can't explain what it is. I'm like, yep, that's your Jewish soul pushing you to come. Sometimes we see it. We go through certain situations where we clearly see that someone has this, like a certain like awakening. You can't awaken something that's not there. You can awaken something that's very dormant, but it has to be there. And that's what the Tanya is talking about. There is something, and a term that's been used for it throughout the generations is the pintele yid. Pintele in Yiddish is a dot. Yid in Yiddish is a Jew. It's like the Jewish dot that's inside you. You have that Jewish dot. We all have it. Sometimes we access it more, sometimes we access it less. Now, another thing that Tanya tells us in this chapter is explaining to us what part of us this Jewish dot resides in. Like, and it goes through the technicalities. I don't want to get too deep in, but it explains that we said that the soul there's the intellect of the soul and there's the emotions of the soul. Within the intellect of the soul, we said that intellect, there's the chokhmah, bina, and dat. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Wisdom is that first spark of an idea that I have, like a flash of an idea. The bina, the understanding, is when I develop the idea. So for example, I'm trying to deal with an issue and I'm really trying to figure out how to resolve it. I'm pacing and pacing, trying to figure it out. And then I was like, I think I figured it out. And then the doorbell rings. That's like, oh, my whole thought process got interrupted. When I come back, I will not be able to recall that idea. I'm going to have to like figure it out again, right? Because what that spark that I had in that moment was like a flash that it really included the whole idea, but it wasn't like fleshed out yet. I needed to, that was the chachma. Then I needed to do bina. I needed to sit and, unpack this idea and develop it so that it became a more fully explained idea. And then the third part is the dat, where I focus on the idea enough that it becomes very real to me. That's the difference between having ideas that are theoretical and don't actually affect us versus having thoughts and ideas in our head that will affect the way that we behave. The Tanya tells us that this Jewish spark transmits through the Chachma, through that flash of an idea, part of my soul. Why is that? If you take those of you who are familiar with Hebrew writing, Chachma, if you split it into two words, it spells Koach Ma, the power of Ma, the power of what? The power of what is a very humbling way of looking at the world, saying that there is something higher. It's the being able to say, what? I don't know. There's something there. I can't explain it. When I'm fully able to explain an idea, then I don't wonder what so much. There's a certain humility with being able to say, what? There's something more. That's where this Jewish spark passes. It's a spiritual sensitivity and awareness that there's something higher. I can't explain it. There's just something higher, something that's driving me. That's where this Jewish spark transmits. The Tanya actually uses this to re-explain a phrase. This is a very interesting phrase, especially for those who've studied it before. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see. Oh. Okay, there's a phrase that says, "A fool believes everything, but the clever man understands." Now, the fool, okay, let's read this. This fool, the fool that's lacking understanding, grasps at every subject through the medium of faith, while the clever man's grasp is based on reason. So when you first read this, it sounds like, a foolish person just believes everything because they don't really understand. But a really clever person, they can understand things. They don't just believe anything you tell them. Look how the Tanya kind of retranslates this. However, this derogation of the fool for approaching every idea with faith can apply only where the subject of his faith is within the grasp of reason. In this case, the basis for his faith is his own lack of understanding, and he's therefore called a fool. But when dealing with godliness, which is essentially beyond comprehension, there is no other approach. You know, sometimes when we don't fully understand something and we can say, all right, I believe that. And then we start really studying, you're like, well, I don't know if I believe that anymore because now I have a lot of other rational, logical explanations. So I don't have to believe. You know, let's say I experience something and I say, wow, that was a miracle. And then I start thinking about it more and I say, well, you know, I can actually explain it. My friend told me that actually medically there's an exception in certain cases that it wasn't actually so miraculous. And actually I really had the best doctor in the world and that's why it happened. The more we have understanding, very often our faith goes down. The Tanya here says, we're not asking anyone not to use their intellect and understanding. The Tanya says that your faith is going to begin right where your level of understanding ends. So we need to study and understand as much as we can, but we always need to know that there's going to be a level that is not comprehensible to me. And that's the level at which my faith stands. Because, I mean, if we fully understood God, who wants to believe in a God that they fully and completely understand? I mean, that would basically make God human-like. I believe in God because God is not, you know, there's rational, there's irrational, and there is like super rational. So I have my rationale, I have my ability to comprehend and understand, and I also have the ability to know that there is something beyond my comprehension and understanding. And no matter how much I study, and I should study, no matter how much I study, there's going to be that point at which I can no longer comprehend, and I know that's where God is. God is going to be at that, and in order to have that, I need to have humility. If I approach God and spirituality and Judaism from a place of, well, I need to understand everything and I'm not going to do anything that I don't understand, that's not a way to connect to something higher, something beyond myself. In order to connect to something beyond myself, I need to tap into the humility of saying, what? I don't know. There's something more. I'm going to strive to understand, but I'll never necessarily fully get there. So if we were to sum up what chapter 18 has been telling us, here's what we learned. There is a unique soul that we have that has this hidden love. It's not typically revealed, but certain conditions bring it out. Every Jew that Tanya emphasizes a few times, every Jew has it equally. There's no one more Jewish or less Jewish. It doesn't matter if you're born to very spiritual, holy parents or very simple, illiterate parents. It doesn't matter. That spark, that Jewish spark, exists equally in every single Jew. We didn't get it because we deserved it or because we earned it. We get it as a spiritual inheritance, which, we know inheritance is just something that you get by being born. It's not something you do. You don't do something for it. We explained that it resides in like the wisdom of our soul, in that ability to say what, in that humility. And it comes out as a certain divine impulse, a spiritual sensitivity that we can never really get rid of. Now, the questions that were left is practically, how do I tap into this power? How do I get myself to feel this on a regular basis and to really utilize it in my everyday life? And that's where chapter 19 is going to start. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, that was easy.
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah, go ahead.
when you talk about, you get to a point where you just, you can't understand. I mean, that's for me, and I imagine this is for all human beings, but when you think about the solar system, then it's just so overwhelming and so just unable to comprehend it that's where my, you're like, that's the only thing that can be is God.
Yeah, and it's different for different people. And it's interesting when you talk to scientists, right? When you talk to like a young new scientist that's not very experienced, they have a very easy time saying, "Oh, who believes in God? That's ridiculous. Science explains everything, and science there's proof for everything, and there's no proof for God." When you talk to the really seasoned scientists, the ones who've really studied a lot and they've kind of gotten to the top of their limit of understanding, that's when they usually say, "You know what? I have so much experience. I study so much. I know so much, but there's some things that I just can't understand." Right? That's where we appreciate it. The faith we're meant to have is not, God doesn't expect us to be stupid, illiterate, not to learn, but to know that there's always something higher. And it will look different for different people. We all also have different types of understanding. We have different ways of comprehending the world, but we all have that limit where we're like, well, that far, that I can't understand anymore.
Well, that's like Einstein, who is known to be the most brilliant human, was a huge believer in God and would say things like, well, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in that God either. Like his own mother challenged him. There's a great story about that. And he was like, but mom, like mother, I don't believe in that type of a God either. Like, but he believed that there had to be something bigger than us, and there had to be something more powerful. And even with all that he could explain, there were still millions of things that made no sense unless there was a superior being that was at such a level of intellect and creativity. And all he said, like all of his theories didn't touch the godly side of life.
Right. And I think as far as I remember, he didn't call it God, right? I remember reading an interesting story where a girl wrote a letter to Einstein and she asked him, how do scientists pray? You guys know this one? Let me see if I can. It was just like a published letter. Hold on, let me see if I have it here. Here, she says, Dear Mr. Einstein, dear Dr. Einstein, we have brought up the question, do scientists pray in our Sunday school class? It began by asking whether we could believe both in science and religion. So we're writing to scientists and other important men to try to have our own question answered. We will feel greatly honored if you answer our question. Do scientists pray? And what do they pray for? We are the 6th grade in Miss Ellis's class. And his answer was very interesting. He says, I don't want to read the whole thing. I'm going to read a section of it. Scientists believe that every occurrence, including the affairs of human beings, is due to the laws of nature. Therefore, a scientist cannot be inclined to believe that the course of events can be influenced by prayer, that is, by supernaturally manifested wish. However, we must concede that our actual knowledge of these forces is imperfect, so that in the end, the belief in the existence of a final, ultimate spirit rests on a kind of faith. Such belief remains widespread even with the current achievements in science. But also, anyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, one that is vastly superior to that of man. In this way, the pursuit of science leads to a religious feeling of a special sort, which is surely quite different from the religiosity of someone more naive. That was as much as he was willing to give her. But basically,
Well, but here's the next quote that goes against what you're saying.
okay.
This is from him. He says, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." So I mean, I've read lots about it. I mean, and here's another quote. This is a quote from him. "I believe in Spinoza's God." Hold on. Let me bring up the whole quote. "I believe in, I moved it, who reveals himself through the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with our daily." So yes, you're right that he didn't believe in like the personal God who cares whether what I'm doing every minute, but that he could not explain things in our universe without some sort of higher power that I mean, I have quotes where he's calling it God. I don't know. You're saying he didn't.
It could be.
call it
I'm not an
God?
expert in Einstein. I don't know. But I think, we sometimes have this discussion with students and we say, let's not call it God. Like, let's just call it the higher power, right? Because sometimes for some people, as soon as they hear the word God, certain images come up of certain things that either they read or they were taught, and it's very limiting. It limits their ability to really comprehend what God is. So when you want to call it a higher power, you want to call it something else,
But he calls it God. I mean, here's a letter to a rabbi. I found another one. 1929 to Rabbi Herbert Goldstein. I have no idea who that is, but that's where he said the quote about, "I believe in Spinoza's God who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind."
Okay, could be. Arlene, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, the attributes of God are different. People feel, perhaps God is the architect, but as Lorraine was saying, he constructed, he developed all of the world and the universes and whatever. But that's where it ends. And then we who are within the realm of his architecture live our lives. And he is kind of what Spinoza's argument was. So, you may believe in a God, but then you differ as to what God's powers, not powers, but his attributes, how he chooses to
Manifest.
to manifest himself. Yeah.
Before we finish, I just wanted to make 3 announcements and then we can go back to the conversation. Announcement number 1 is that if don't currently have plans to either host a Seder or attend a Seder, please consider yourself invited to our Seder. We will be hosting both Seders on Saturday, April 12th and on Sunday, April 13th. And please be in touch with me directly. We'll be very happy to host you for the Seder. That was announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, on a soul level, so Kabbalistic teachings teach us that eating matzah on the night of the Seder actually has a very deep spiritual effect on us. Specifically, matzah that is the handmade shmura matzah, which is probably most similar to the matzah that the Jews ate while they were leaving Egypt, has a unique spiritual effect on us. On the first night, it is called the food of faith. It literally feeds faith to our soul. And on the second night, it's called the food of healing. And it is known to really physically heal. So if you don't have shmura matzah at your Seder, or you're not sure you will have, firstly, it is available in North Dallas. You can get it at Tom Thumb. You could get it at Costco. We have plenty of gift boxes of handmade shmura matzah that I'm more than happy to bring to you or to have you pick up. So even if it's not the matzah you typically eat, but you want to incorporate at least some of it to your Seder, that would be a very spiritually uplifting experience. My third announcement is more of a request. So some of you might be familiar with the fact that Judaism has a very specific way of dealing with death and the afterlife. We know that a soul lived before our physical life and continues to live after our physical life. And when somebody passes away, there's a very specific way in which we escort the soul on its journey and the body in its journey. So I mentioned before, there is a young woman who we know who is currently in her last moments on this earth. She is quite alone, does not have much family or friends to speak of here. And we will be needing people to serve as what's called a shomer, which is somebody to stay with the deceased until the time of the burial. So if you have, now just to clarify, Dallas Jewish Funeral Home has a special room or apartment that they provide for this. You don't actually have to come into contact with a deceased body. It's really just knowing that there is a Jewish person who's there, ideally being, mindful about the role that they're playing in helping to kind of keep this soul company until it is going to, make its way to the next world. If you have any availability tomorrow from early morning, really until Wednesday morning, likely, please let me know. We are going to be arranging shifts of people who can spend some time, any amount of time that you have, to just be able to be there. So please be in touch with me and let me know. It is a tremendous mitzvah. We know that anything that's done for someone after their passing is called chesed shel emet, the truest kindness, because while we often do kindness to people without expecting any form of repayment, when you do a favor to someone after they have passed, there is absolutely no way they can ever pay you back. So it is considered the ultimate form of chesed. So if you know someone or you yourself may be available, please let me know and we'll touch base after. On a happier note, we are going, we're going to take a break until after Passover. Next week, Monday, we will be deep in Passover mode, so I can't promise to be available for Tanya. The Monday after that is already Passover, so God willing, we will reconvene after the holiday. Now we could go back to talking about chapter 18 and Tanya. Harriet, what do you want to share?
Well, I have a question about the soul in 18, but do you need people for Tahara?
The Tahara is arranged, God willing, so that I think that part is taken care of. But thank you.
If you need an extra person, let me know.
Thank you.
So I was thinking about tapping into the Jewish soul and about this weekend, the part of this weekend about building the Mishkan and the Shekinah, the Shekinah is from the same root as Mishkan, and that it is a way of dwelling in this world, and that the soul is, that our soul is one of the ways that we are connected with God in this physical world and about tapping into, I mean, you were talking about the example of the college student who was kind of intuitively or inspirationally moved into a connection with Yom Kippur, and about ways of being more connected on that soul level.
I'm sorry, I thought you were explaining something. I didn't hear the question.
No, the question was about ways of being more connected. I mean, your example of that kind of, she was just following some kind of soul level
So how to
pull.
actively connect to that instead of just subconsciously connecting.
Right.
So I would say two things. Firstly, this is really like right in the middle of the discussion of the Tanya, because chapter 19 begins with this question exactly. How do I tap into not generally connecting to my soul, but how do I tap into that soul power, that certain power that I know I have when I need it and I can't find inspiration otherwise, then I know there's a little piece of inspiration that lives inside me. How do I tap into that to utilize that? So let's maybe hold that question until chapter 19, because that's when it really it walks us through a meditation to help us awaken this part of us. But in general, how do we connect to our soul? It's how do we, I would say more so, how do we act upon it? How do we express our soul in this world? Like when I feel it, when I'm overcome with a feeling of inspiration, what am I supposed to do? So the Torah tells us that the main thing you need to do is the action. God says, I put your soul into a physical body because I want you to do actions, physical actions in this world. If all I wanted you to do was to feel and to connect emotionally, you could have remained a soul in the spiritual worlds. I need souls in this physical world because that's your mission. Connect, be inspired, and do, and bring the light into the physical world that you are. So whenever we do feel that inspiration, we have to act on it because inspiration is fleeting and action is more permanent. So we get inspired, run and do a mitzvah with it. What if I'm not inspired and I want to tap into that inspiration? That's where chapter 19 is going to take us, about tapping into this deeper inspiration.
And is that how we reveal God? Is that part of helping?
How we
I mean,
reveal God in this world, revealing God in this world is by doing his mitzvahs in this world. That's practically speaking how we reveal God in the world. Kabbalah teaches us that every single thing, physical thing in the world was created in order for God to be revealed in it, except for those things that God tells us are off limits. The 365 prohibitions, God says, non-kosher meat, I don't want to be revealed in that. Don't even touch it. But anything that is okay and permitted, the tree, I'm looking at Harriet's background, the tree, the road, the leaves, the grass, the houses, the fence, every single one of these things could become a vehicle to revealing godliness. And my physical being, with the power of the soul that's inside me, has the ability to do that and the mandate to do that. And we each, there's an annual cycle of Tanya study to complete the Tanya once a year. So in that cycle, we're currently in the middle of chapter 37, I think it is today. So in the last few days, the Tanya was actually talking specifically about that. So that's why it's fresh in my mind. The Tanya says that every person has their piece of the world that they were sent here to elevate. Now, it doesn't have to be a physical piece. It can also be like a conceptual piece. Like you could have been sent, if you're an artist, you could have been sent to the world to bring godliness into the arts. And if you're a scientist, maybe you were sent to the world to bring godliness into science. Maybe you were sent into the world to bring godliness by being that very caring friend who takes care of their neighbors and brings God into their day-to-day interactions within their community. Each of us have our space in the world that we are intended to reveal godliness in. No one gives us a card that says that this is your exact mission and purpose, but typically by looking inward, by looking at ourselves and examining our life circumstances, that's where we get our answers. So we look and we say, wait, what is my sphere of influence? Who are the people that I interact with? What are the things that I uniquely have access to? I have certain talents, I have certain skills, I have certain connections. I have that great uncle who's a senator, I have the neighbor who's an artist, I have the sister who's, we look at our lives, and each of us, when we piece all of our pieces together, the people in our lives, the circumstances in our lives, what we do and don't have access to, what our personality is like, we can kind of find, like, what are the opportunities that I have uniquely to reveal godliness in the world? And that's usually your answer to, what part of the world was I meant to illuminate here? And that rides off of the belief in what we've mentioned before, the divine providence. If every single thing in the world is divinely ordained, meaning where I live and who I interact with and what job I get or don't get and what money I do or don't have access to and what friends I do or don't have access to and what my talents are, it's not by accident that some of us are better at writing or better at drawing or better at speaking or more outgoing or more introverted. All of these things together create a puzzle of a piece of this world that I uniquely can elevate. And I can only do that so long as I'm soul and body. Have a wonderful week, everybody. We should share a lot of good news and happiness. And have a kosher and happy Pesach.
Happy
Thank you.
Passover.
Happy Passover.